Welcome back to the show. Today, I am going to do something different and step into my discomfort zone by recording a solo episode around teachings from the river. So it'll be a multi part series that I'll sprinkle in throughout, my interview episodes. And I'm going to start today. So, because I'm very passionate and I've been using teachings or lessons from the river in my coaching, in my kayak instruction for over 2 decades. And they're so powerful as mental agility strategies to help you move from feeling disempowered to feeling empowered in any area of life. And I think it's really beautiful and powerful when you cultivate a relationship with the river, with water. And it gives looking at life through that lens can give you a different perspective. And when we gain a new perspective, it can help get us out of old ways of thinking and habit patterns, maybe break a cycle. And so, I want to talk about lessons from the river. And the first lesson I want to talk about is navigating rough waters. And by the way, if you are a whitewater kayaker, this will probably resonate pretty deeply. And if you're not, it will still resonate because the river is such a beautiful metaphor for life. So I invite you to continue to listen, even if you're not a kayaker, and see what you get from this. So, when it comes to navigating the flow of a river or the flow of life, the only thing you can control is yourself. You can't control the river, it's too powerful. And in life, we can't control life. We'd like to think we can, but ultimately we can. We can't control what happens. The only thing we can do is respond to what happens or attempt to set ourselves up like we do in the river, set ourselves up to navigate with confidence and to navigate with the flow, right? Instead of fighting against the flow. So in whitewater kayaking, in river running, we have about five, or not about, we have five strategies or things that we think about. One is position. Where are you positioning yourself relative to the current or to the feature that you want to navigate through or around or across? What's your boat angle, right? Where are you pointing your boat so that you can expose just enough of your kayak so that you don't turn too soon or don't flip over, or that you actually are able to paddle across the current to get where you want to go? When you're navigating a river, you can't just point your boat anywhere and expect to go where you want to go because the water's moving downstream. The third is edge control. So which means you either lift up the upstream edge of your kayak or the downstream edge of your kayak, depending on what your goal is and where you want to go. And so I think of that in life as like how much are you willing to tilt? Like how much are you willing to risk or not risk, or where is that fine line? And then there's vision. So looking where you want to go, not at the obstacles in your way. So that's a really important one, right? Looking where you want to go, not at the obstacles in your way. And the last one is momentum. Some people call it speed. And I find that one of the biggest mistakes that paddlers make is actually over paddling and trying to paddle too hard. And it's like kind of like a bull in a china shop, right? And when you're over paddling, you actually lose a bit of control because you don't have the time to correct when you need to correct, or for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you're peeling out into the current from an eddy, from a calm spot, for instance, when you paddle too hard, the river hits you with equal force and it's difficult to maintain control. In kayaking, all you need is to be as fast or just a little bit faster than the current. And so we can look at these 5 strategies, right? Position. So in life, what's how are you positioning yourself to reach your goals? Or how are you positioning yourself in the face of a situation that is challenging? Are you positioning yourself as full of possibility? Are you positioning yourself as a victim, right? Are you positioning yourself with old habit patterns? There's a lot that you can think about. And in kayaking, typically we want to position ourselves. And sometimes the positioning is sometimes when, or at least for myself, if I'm nervous, I'll actually think that I'm positioning myself. I try and position myself more conservatively, but that actually backfires. Like, for instance, if I'm trying to avoid something in the middle and of the river and I go too far to the right, I can actually and the water is pushing off the right side, I can actually go too far right and get shanked over into the middle, right? So positioning requires awareness, and it also requires calmness and thoughtfulness, right? And I always coach my students, when you're peeling out of an eddy, be aware of where you are starting from, because if you start too deep in the eddy, then you lose your boat angle, which is actually the most important piece. So with boat angle, when if anyone we talk about ferrying in whitewater kayaking is crossing the current without losing too much ground. And so in order to do that, and those of you who aren't paddlers, maybe you've observed animals do it, they go at a diagonal. They position themselves to where they're moving upstream slightly at a diagonal, so that they don't get carried away too quickly by the downstream flow. And that boat angle is so key in kayaking. And in life, it's like, where are you angling yourself? Like, what's your angle? Again, are you, putting yourself in a position at an angle that will make it effortless to reach your goal? And are you even thinking about that? Or are you just like going for it without a lot of thoughtfulness? In my life, there's definitely been benefits of both. I have to say that sometimes I just go for things without thinking about it too much. And in French Canadian culture, it's called being a fonceur or fonceuse, right? Where you just go. And there's times in life to be that way. And again, in whitewater kayaking, depending on what your goal is, the angle of your boat is going to change. And I think that's a big thing. If we look at vision, hi, welcome back to the podcast. I am stepping into my discomfort zone by recording a solo episode. And I'm going to start recording solo episodes and sprinkle them throughout the podcast, because I'm really passionate about helping folks learn from the river. And I'm speaking to both whitewater kayakers and non-whitewater kayakers. So you do not have to be a paddler to learn from and appreciate these mental agility strategies that I've learned over 3 decades by creating a relationship with the river. It's really powerful when you create such a relationship, and then you can learn from that relationship and apply it to different areas of your life to move from feeling disempowered to feeling empowered in any area of your life. And I think that it's always helpful to use metaphors to gain different perspectives on things, and maybe have you think differently. And so today I want to talk about navigating the flow of life and navigating the flow of water. And when it comes to navigating the flow, whether it's rough waters or maybe even meandering waters, it's important to understand that the only thing that you can control is yourself, right? You can't control the river and you can't control life. We like to trick ourselves into thinking that we can control life, or maybe it's we can get feel really disappointed when something happens that was not the outcome that we had hoped. But in reality, the only thing we can truly control is ourselves and our response to what's happening, our response to the flow. And in whitewater kayaking, you learn how to navigate the flow with specific strategies. And depending on what your goal is, whether it's ferrying across the current, which is crossing the current without losing too much ground, or peeling out of an eddy. In very simple terms, an eddy is a place in the river where there's very slow flow typically, and it's where you can pull out from the current and stop and rest, or just, you know, look at your next move. And so when you're catching an eddy or peeling out of an eddy, there are certain strategies that you use to stay upright and to give yourself the best chance of working with the flow. And I think that's a really important concept both in on the river and in life, is working with the flow. And so if you're a whitewater kayaker, this will probably resonate pretty deeply. And even if you're not, I encourage you to listen and see if you can get a different perspective from this episode. And so there are 5 strategies that we use in whitewater kayaking for river running. They are position, so the position of your boat relative to the flow, and in life, like how are you positioning yourself? Right? Are you positioning yourself as full of possibility? Are you positioning yourself as a victim? Are you positioning yourself as someone who has a lot of agency? Right? How are you positioning yourself as generous? How are you positioning yourself in life? And so with the position in a kayak, depending on what your goal is, the position will look different. And it requires having an understanding, of course, of reading water. And I think of that in life as an awareness. So we all have blind spots for sure. And the more self-aware we are and the more aware we are of our surroundings and people, the more our ability to stay present can help us determine our position. And in kayaking, having a deep understanding of the flow allows us to better position our boats for success. The next one is boat angle. So, where are you going and what angle do you have to put your boat at to get there? And it's not obvious for, like, when folks are first learning how to kayak, you think, okay, to cross the current from one eddy to another, you just point. On land, we can just look across the street and like walk straight across the street. Because there's flow in the river, we have to actually place our boat angle facing slightly upstream to be able to maintain or not lose too much ground, right? Because the flow is pushing us. It also helps us also to stay upright, which is always more fun. And you may have, if you're not a paddler, you may have seen this in animals crossing flow. If you watch ducks or any animal, deer swimming across a river, you'll notice that they go at an angle, like at a diagonal. And so when you angle yourself toward your goal, sometimes it's not like a direct angle, like from here to there. Sometimes you have to point upstream. Sometimes you have to point downstream. Sometimes you have to point across or into a feature. And so considering your angle is really important. Next is edge control. And so again, in whitewater kayaking, we don't always want to keep our boats flat. When we're crossing current, we either have to lift our upstream edge or our downstream edge. And it's counterintuitive because we kind of get attached to staying flat at first, right? Before we have an understanding that being on edge can actually be very stable, and especially when crossing currents. Like it takes a minute for our minds to wrap our heads around that. And so with that edge in life as well as how much of that edge do you want to play? Right? Are you willing to push your edge? Because if we try and keep our boat flat and we try and keep ourselves in our comfort zones, then we end up flipping over. Like if we try and cross an eddy line with our boats flat, we just end up tumbling over because the water is always more powerful, even in class 1 or 2 water. And so life and the river require us, if we want to navigate powerfully, requires us to play our edge. And then the more confident we get with our edge, then we start maybe even doing more advanced moves or downriver play boating stuff where we're actually, dropping our edge into the current so that the current helps, stand us up vertically, or do whatever your goal is. And so playing that edge on the river and in life is so important. Then we have vision. And in whitewater kayaking, we talk a lot about don't look at the obstacle in your way, look where you want to go. Because the water flows around obstacles in the river. And it never fails. If there's a rock in the middle of the river and you stare at it, you typically end up on the rock, which is, if you're trying to avoid it, you don't want to be there. If you're trying to do a river running move using the rock, then you're stoked. But typically, if you're trying to avoid the rock, but you stare at it, or you're trying to avoid a line or a wave and you stare at it, you'll end up there. And that's because where we look is typically where we go. And so it's important to train ourselves to look where we want to go and not focus on the obstacles in our way or the challenges in our way. That doesn't mean ignoring or burying our heads in the sand or being in denial of challenges, obstacles, right? It means acknowledging the obstacle because you want to know in whitewater, it's very important to know where you don't want to go so that you can and acknowledge that. And so then you can focus on looking where you want to go and then positioning your boat, having the right boat angle, deciding on your edge, right? And keeping that vision. And so in life, where are you looking? Where are you putting most of your attention and awareness? Are you really focused on everything that's wrong in your life? Or are you looking at where you want to go and maybe what's right? Even if it's like small increments and celebrating small wins. And then we have momentum. Some people like to say speed. When I'm teaching kayaking, I don't like to use the word speed because I think that one of the biggest mistakes I see paddlers make is over paddling too hard, especially coming in and out of eddies, crossing currents, and it messes them up. If we're going full bore without considering position and boat angle and edge, we're going to flip over, right? There's too much emphasis on speed. And when you think of that in life, when we want things to happen too fast, or sometimes we jump into things too fast, it can backfire on us, or we get disappointed, right, or resigned. And so in whitewater kayaking, same thing though. If you don't have enough momentum, then you're at the whim of the current, right? Then the current has more power to push on your boat, sink your edge, sink your tail, whatever it's doing, because you don't have enough momentum. So that's kind of like, again, staying in our comfort zones, not getting enough momentum. And sometimes that means like, oh, we try something once or twice and we don't get the momentum that we were hoping, and then we give up. So small, consistent actions over time, really make a difference. So it's not about going super fast, but rather going as fast. And it's not about going super fast. It's also not about not going fast enough. It's about going as fast or a little bit faster than the current. So matching the current. And again, it takes a deep understanding or presence with the flow. Now, there's been times in my life where I have gone full bore into something and it's paid off. So I'm not saying that it's all black and white, right? Again, what's your goal? Sometimes getting moving and going fast is like a way to get moving. I also think that in our culture, sometimes we think like, oh, that person is successful and like we think they achieved that overnight without realizing that they've been matching or going a little bit faster than the current, just keeping a consistent pace. And then there's some times where it's important to take advantage of opportunities and speed up. And there's times when it's important to slow down, right? And rest. And that'll be for another episode, talking about how the flow of the river works and how there's always opportunity to go and to rest. I'll leave that for another episode. So, just to recap, when it comes to navigating the flow of life, when it comes to navigating the flow of the river, right? The only thing that you can control is yourself. And you can think about these tenets of whitewater kayaking. How are you positioning yourself and your mindset? What's your angle? How are you setting your angle? Right? Are you playing your edge? Are you looking where you want to go? And are you matching the momentum of the moment? Right? Going not too hard, not too slow, maybe just a little bit faster than the momentum of the moment, taking advantage of opportunities that present themselves and staying consistent, maintaining that momentum over time. And so I hope this has been helpful, maybe giving you some insights or something to think about in your life or a different perspective on navigating the flow. And I appreciate you listening and tuning in to my first solo episode. And yeah, please leave a review if you love the podcast. I really appreciate you leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And look forward to being with you again. And are you matching the momentum of the moment? Not going too fast, not going too slow, and creating opportunities with consistent action over time, consistent momentum over time. So I hope that these tenets that are part of whitewater kayaking have been helpful for you in navigating and maybe having a different perspective on navigating the flow of the river, of navigating the flow of life. And with my coaching clients, I always, at the end of a coaching call, I like to have them commit to a few actions that they're going to take. And so my challenge for you is, what is your commitment for the next week, 2 weeks, month? What's your commitment coming out of listening to this episode? You might be committed to, assessing your position or your angle, or maybe you're committed to playing your edge a little more. Or maybe you're committed to getting really clear on where you're looking, where you're focusing your vision. Or maybe you're really committed to getting started or increasing your momentum or maybe decreasing your momentum, right? So think of, I challenge you to choose, and you don't have to choose all of them, right? Maybe choose one thing or two things that you want to commit to. And I'd love to hear how that commitment plays out. You can tag me on Instagram, Anna C. Levesque. You can send me an email, anna@mindbodypaddle.com. Would love to hear from you. And also, thank you so much for listening to my solo episode. And if you love the podcast, thank you for listening. Thank you for leaving a review wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify. I really appreciate you and look forward